This is not a story about buildings coming down or a rocket count. It's about civilians suddenly being thrown into despair. A boy in Gaza running to a coffin after his father and elder brother were killed. Dozens have now died. Panic and fear etched on the faces of those in Ashkelon in Israel as the warning sirens go off again, and where the number of dead rises there too. Today started with more airstrikes in Gaza, this tiny, densely packed territory, just 25 miles long, 5 miles across, given a deadly wake-up call. And the day was punctuated with more massive bombardment, Israel saying it's targeting places associated with senior figures in Hamas. And while militants have been killed, many civilians, including children, are known to be among the dead. And if they haven't lost relatives, more and more of those living in this impoverished strip are losing their homes and belongings and are in fear. Overnight, militant groups in Gaza sent a huge barrage of rockets into Israel. And while most were stopped, many did manage to get through, some hitting buildings. In Rishon LeZion, a 50-year-old woman became one of 6 Israelis who've now been killed. So how did we get here? Though the focus is now on Gaza and southern Israel, it was events in Jerusalem that led to what we're seeing now. An Israeli court decided it was right to evict several Palestinian families from their homes in occupied East Jerusalem. Last Friday, those families and others had gathered to break their Ramadan fast. But Jewish settlers came to make their presence felt and stake their claim to the homes. It quickly led to scuffles. The UN and US condemned any forced evictions of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, but the issue had already sparked more confrontation in Jerusalem. Israeli police using rubber bullets and stun grenades and water cannons. But it was Monday when things escalated so dramatically. Israeli nationalists prepared to march through the Muslim Quarter to celebrate their country's capture of East Jerusalem 54 years ago. Palestinians had been in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, some ready to oppose the march, when Israeli police stormed the mosque compound. Once again using force in the form of sound bombs and rubber bullets, but now at the doors of one of Islam's holiest sites. Around the compound, Palestinians threw rocks and bottles, but more than 300 were injured, as well as 21 Israeli police. Later, when a fire broke out at the mosque compound, Israelis were seen celebrating. Several rockets were fired from Gaza, and although they were shot down, Israel decided to hit back hard, with airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. It said it was targeting militants, but of nearly 30 people killed were 10 children, including a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. By Tuesday, it felt like a point of no return had been crossed, and Gaza had, as has happened so many times in the past, become the cauldron of conflict. For the most part, Gazans do not appear to blame the Palestinian militants or the rocket fire for bringing this catastrophe on them, saying it is their occupier that is the aggressor. But Israel says this is entirely the fault of Hamas and that it will continue its military action. With neither side backing down, the funerals look set to keep coming for days.
That was Alim Makboul. We're joined from Ramallah by the leader of the third party in Palestinian politics, the Palestinian National Initiative, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Dr. Barghouti, can you describe to us what you're seeing on the ground now?
Well, it's a very sad situation. I myself witnessed what happened in Jerusalem when the Israeli army stormed the Aqsa Mosque and started beating people, shooting at them, injuring during 3 days more than 1,000 people. 6 people have lost their eyes. And then attacks on Sheikh Jarrah, where the Israeli illegal settlers, according to international law, were trying to evict the residents. 500 people are threatened to be ethnically cleansed for the second time in their life, because they have been ethnically cleansed in 1948 by Israeli government. So this, of course, led to this escalation, as you can see today. And the core problem is that we are under Israeli military occupation for 54 years, the longest occupation in modern history, that has transformed into a system of racial discrimination and apartheid.
Let me ask
These
you.
are not my words. These are the words of Human Rights Watch and an Israeli human rights organization called B'Tselem. They say this is a system of apartheid.
So let me ask you, because you talk about the escalation, and we've seen the acts from Israel today, and they say they are responding to Hamas terrorism. Can I ask you, do you condemn what Hamas is doing right now?
No, I don't condemn our right to resist occupation. I condemn the use of violence in general, because I am an advocate of non-violence.
Should they be firing rockets?
But I also say that what should be condemned here is the Israeli aggression, the Israeli occupation, the Israeli apartheid system. It's time for the whole world to stop holding Israel impunitive to international law. Israel is committing war crimes, 3 war crimes: persecution, apartheid, and occupation.
Yeah.
These crimes have to stop, and it is not acceptable.
And I will be putting that
have no right to defend themselves.
Forgive me, I'll be putting that to the Israeli representative in a moment, but Hamas is a terrorist organisation which is currently sending in thousands of rockets. Now, they are arguably on a propaganda mission to win Palestinian hearts and minds, because there is so little leadership elsewhere from Palestinian politicians.
I think you should be careful about not using Israeli propaganda here, because no, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. This is what some countries consider.
You don't think
But
Hamas is a terrorist organization?
No, I don't think it's a terrorist organization. Hamas is part of the
They send rockets into a country with civilians.
Yes, they send rockets in response to Israeli attacks. And they said very clearly, if Israel attacks the Palestinian buildings in Gaza and bring them down, which we will shoot back. And Israel did. They also said, if Israel attacks Al-Aqsa Mosque, we will respond. The question here is as follows: are Palestinians and Israelis equal human beings or not? If they are equal human beings, then why an American president would say that Israel has the right to defend itself?
Forgive me.
But doesn't say that Palestinians have the right to defend themselves.
And that one will be taken to the Israelis. But forgive me, the question was actually, where is the leadership right now? Where is Mahmoud Abbas? What is the offering from moderate Palestinians that will stop them from condoning what Hamas is doing right now, because they are seeing democratic means elsewhere? You know, Mahmoud Abbas cancelled elections when there could have been a way round. There is a vacuum that Hamas is filling.
And as a leader of democratic opposition, we opposed his decision of cancelling elections. He said that he's cancelling them because Israel is denying us the right to have them in Jerusalem. And our response was, we should have elections despite Israeli decision and conduct elections in Jerusalem as an act of popular nonviolent resistance. But on the other hand, you must understand that although I am in opposition, I must say that Mr. Abbas has become a victim of his belief that he could make peace with Israel, that he could make peace with Netanyahu, that he could make peace through negotiations. He went this way all the way and lost popular support, and in response, he got what? He is under occupation, and the Israelis has denied him everything.
Okay.
In reality, he's a victim of Israeli aggression as well.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, thank you. Thanks for your time here on Newsnight this evening. Well, let's turn now to the Israel Defence Force. We're joined now by Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, and we've just heard a statement from Netanyahu, Jonathan Conricus, that there will be no let-up. Now, whether or not you are targeting them, civilians and children are getting killed. We just learnt tonight of a mother and her disabled son. In Tower, tyre blocks are coming down in a place where 50% of the population are children.
Yes, good evening. And unfortunately, just 2 hours ago, it was confirmed that a 6-year-old boy, an Israeli boy, was killed in his home by a direct rocket hit rockets fired from Gaza that have been fired relentlessly at our civilians for 48 hours straight, more than 1,500 rockets. And it's our goal, the IDF's goal. I won't go into politics, and I'm not going to reflect on the previous speaker, but what I will say is that we are defending our civilians against a jihadi terrorist organization that is using their civilians as human shields and attacking our civilians with rockets.
OK, you have made the point that kids on both sides are dying. It is inconceivable. And yet we've heard from Israel's defence minister tonight and from the Prime Minister that Israel won't stop its military operation until, his words, Gaza is completely quiet. Now, that sounds chilling. What are you imagining?
As a military spokesperson, I really don't have to imagine. It's really clear what we're looking for. This event started 48 hours ago when Hamas fired rockets at our capital, at Jerusalem, and forced almost 1 million Israelis into shelters, and they've continued to fire rockets ever since. It's not for me to say what will end the situation, but it is, I think, in the military realm of operations to understand that as long as Hamas continues to fire and do what they're doing, there simply is no way of even thinking of other options.
You talk as if there's equilibrium. You have one of the most advanced armies in the world. You have the power. You are Goliath in this. Gaza has no airport, no seaport. It doesn't have bomb shelters. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have an escape.
What it has is, unfortunately, a terrorist organization that rules and oppresses Palestinians in Gaza. And to tell you the truth, I feel sorry for the people who live under that kind of rule. And I totally agree with what you said before. The fact that women and children are dragged into these hostilities and conflict is very sad.
They're dragged in by the politics of your government, and the IDF has been responsible for the forced evacuation of many Palestinians from their homes, most recently in Sheikh Jarrah. You know this didn't start last week or 48 hours ago or with the rockets or with Ramadan. The root problem is Israel's occupation in a system which you have heard human rights groups call out as discriminatory persecution.
I reject that, and for me, the topic here is what we're dealing with is rocket fire from Gaza and Hamas that for some reason, probably out of their political claims and the competition of hegemony in Palestinian politics, is using rockets instead of diplomacy.
Look, if you want to talk power games, then Benjamin Netanyahu is running away from corruption charges on his side, and that's a sign of a government in trouble too. So surely you recognise that this goes far deeper than what happened 48 hours ago. It goes to the treatment Israel has shown the Palestinian people over 50 years.
Right, but I think that some of your questions are best focused at the Prime Minister himself or the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm here to speak on behalf of the military, and one of the few advantages that we have is a little bit of clarity and simplicity in what we're dealing with. Fact of the matter is that Israel didn't start bombing Gaza out of nowhere. No, we are responding to what Hamas decided to do. We're responding to the fact that they decided to fire rockets.
And when you respond, do you imagine this will go... Forgive me for interrupting. Will this go to a ground invasion? Is that where this will end?
Well, it's definitely not what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for is, as our defense minister said, and our prime minister has reiterated that as well, stability and quiet, and that our civilians can live safely and quietly in their own homes. The 6 Israeli civilians that have been killed have nothing to do with Hamas. They have nothing to do with Palestinian politics. Okay. They have nothing to do with terrorist tactics in Gaza either.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
So
what role, if any, can the UN play in crisis solving? Do they have the teeth for it without the support of a more muscular American intervention? Lynn Hastings is the UN Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process and joins us now from, I think, Jerusalem. Lynn Hastings, just tell us what you can actually do on the ground right now in the middle of all this.
No, thanks, Emily. There are a number of things that we can do. Number one, of course, is to continue to provide assistance to the Palestinian people, in particular those in Gaza, whom we have been providing humanitarian assistance and actually rehabilitating and providing reconstruction of the damage done after the 2014 war. That reconstruction is still ongoing.
So this is humanitarian rather than political at this point. Can you see any way of bringing the sides to the table in the midst of the escalation?
Well, yes, that is one of the jobs that the United Nations does on the ground. It will obviously be very challenging in light of the current circumstances, but there are obviously efforts going on as we speak. Significant outreach to various partners, both the parties, the regional actors, the members of the quartet, which is comprised of the Russians, the European Union, the Americans, and the UN. There's also efforts going on by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. There are many efforts and engagements with Arab Jewish lobbies and organizations around the world.
Forgive me, Lynn Hastings, but the list is long, but they just sound like words. Now, the longer-term issues go back to something that you have called out, the settlements and the settlement violence against Palestinians, seeing their homes destroyed. If I'm not mistaken, the UN has called this out as a war crime under the Geneva Convention. So what is the UN doing about it? And is Israel listening? Because if not, it doesn't matter what you say or who you bring around the table, they're not listening to you.
No, and absolutely. The backdrop of all of the incidents that your reporter led the story with, the Sheikh Jarrah evictions, the Ramadan celebrations, etc., there is definitely a backdrop to those, as you quite rightly point out. Settlement expansion, increasing settler violence against Palestinians, demolitions of Palestinian properties in both East Jerusalem and parts of the West Bank, the inability of Palestinians to be able to build on their own land in, again, East Jerusalem and in parts of the West Bank because they are largely unable to get permits to build, and as a result, they don't see any future, and some of their homes are actually demolished. So yes, that is the backdrop, together with the cyclical violence that has been going on ever since Hamas was elected in 2007. So these are very, very difficult issues, and which I think somebody has said tonight goes back many decades. So in terms of what we're doing right now, I don't think we're going to solve those issues immediately. What we're looking for is an immediate de-escalation so that then the parties can get to the table for a ceasefire and ultimately back to the table to negotiate a peace deal.
Lynn Hastings, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us here. Now, Aleem Maqbool was the BBC's Gaza correspondent for several years. He knows the area and its tensions extremely well. We'll be hearing from him in a moment. But before we do, here's the US President Joe Biden speaking a little earlier.
My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory.
Joe Biden. Aleem, what kind of intervention do you think is needed here? It's a very tricky time for the new US administration to decide if it wants to completely cut ties with what the Trump administration did, or if it wants to start getting involved a little bit more in the kind of UN problems we've heard about. Where do you think the answer is?
Yeah, it's interesting. We keep talking about these international stories, and for a lot of people, they're looking at what's going on in various parts of the world, whether it's Russia on the border of Ukraine or China and Taiwan, or what's going on now, as various places trying to test this new administration. And even from the moment that Joe Biden decided he was going to stand for office, there was this big debate from the progressive wing of his party as to whether he would move to the left on various issues. He's shown in office he is malleable on some issues. In this regard, although the progressive wing of the party had hoped, particularly after the Trump years, where, for example, Jewish settlements in the West Bank were declared as being legal, where Jerusalem was recognized as the capital of Israel, that they had hoped perhaps there would be a breakaway from this unwavering support from Israel, whatever it did. I think from what we're hearing this evening, Benjamin Netanyahu saying there will be no ceasefire, for him, it doesn't matter what the UN says. It doesn't matter what the EU says. He clearly gets this sense from the Biden administration that he can continue to do what he is doing now. He doesn't need to rein it in. So in some respects, as has happened in various other issues, but particularly this one, there are those in the progressive wing of the party who feel they are let down. Having said that, there really was no point during the primary campaign, during the election campaign, when frankly Joe Biden gave us any sense that he would do any different than he's doing right now.
Yeah, you're bringing in, of course, your other home, Washington, D.C., which is where we're headed now to join Rashida Tlaib, a congresswoman on the left of the Democratic Party in America. And in a moment, we'll speak to Haley Sofer, the CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America and former National Security Advisor for the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Rashida Tlaib, do you notice a change in the kind of response coming from the Biden administration? Is this what you want to see?
Unfortunately, no. You know, I'm the only Palestinian American in the United States Congress. If anything, I want to make sure that as we're talking about whatever relationship we have with this current country that is, you know, pushing forward on their apartheid state and policies, that we are still humanizing and recognizing the existence of the Palestinian people and their plight. And so I don't know how my nation, my own country, who claims to uphold human rights and international order, can fund this at a tune of $4 billion a year and not call or use it as least for leverage to promote some sort of peace or at least accountability on the current prime minister, which is continued on with his racist anti-Arab rhetoric that is now leading to so much violence.
Just spell that out then. What do you actually want to see happen? You're saying that that money, the $4 billion, should halt completely?
Absolutely. And this is how you can use it. It's simple. Look, I'm a mother, so I'm going to simplify this. When somebody is misbehaving or not following in international human rights or agreements that the United States has actually was at the table when those agreements came to, which included some agreements around East Jerusalem, that if you're not going to buy that, if you're going to use weapons, of war weapons on innocent civilians, that you are told enough. We're not going to fund that. You're going to pull back and you're going to follow United Nations processes, international law, and we're going to fight back against any racism or oppression or an apartheid state. The root causes of violence in Israel, Emily, is specifically based on this continuation from this right wing of the Israeli government, and Netanyahu is leading it.
Forgive me, but these people are not kids. And if you take away money, which is desperately needed, I know, for humanitarian, what my point is, you are pushing them into the hands of Hamas. That's where it ends.
I'm not trying, of course, but I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is people simply out there, you cannot just ask them, oh, please have peace without actually using the leverage we have. I mean, up until last week, they were telling us to shut our mouths. They were telling the United States, stay out of our business. Well, if you want us to stay out of your business, then you're going to have to give us, not come out over here and try to ask for billions of dollars in military aid. No, Israel is forcing Palestinians from their homes in Jerusalem and allowing right-wing Israeli groups literally to take over the community. There are videos of Palestinians pleading with Israelis to please stop. In one instance, the Israeli settler, literally this violent right-wing member of the Israeli party, tells a Palestinian woman, don't worry, if I don't steal your home, someone else is going to steal it. We have people that are literally like Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem who told New York Times that these violent evictions, you know, I don't even call them evictions. They're literally forcing people out of their homes. It's not like they didn't pay rent. It's literally, this is where they live. They own their homes. He said the part of the strategy is layers of Jews are across Jerusalem security. And again, that's based on racism. That's based on hate.
Let me ask you very briefly, though, because we saw in the report from Ali Makboul, our correspondent, that the actions of Hamas and the actions, you could say, of Israel are pushing more people in Gaza, Gazans, to support Hamas. What would be your message to Hamas tonight?
Oh, no, let me tell you something. Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian people. I want that to be very clear. I'm tired of talking about this other right-wing extremist group that really is not even centering on what I think the Gaza people really want. Because let me tell you, what I hear from Gaza people is like, doing this violent attack is not going to bring their family members back. They're not going to bring their beautiful children back, their innocent children back. You know what they want? They want to be free.
Okay.
They want to live with human dignity.
Rashida
And do
Tlaib.
you know what that's going to take? That's going to take holding Israel accountable. Human Rights Watch declared them an apartheid state. The prominent human rights organization B'Tselem in Israel declared them an apartheid state.
I'm going to take some of these points. Rashida Tlaib, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go straight to Hayley Soifer. There does sound and seem to be much more pressure on this administration now. They are looking for a much harder line on Israel. Many of your fellow Democrats.
Well, the administration is taking this conflict very seriously. In the past day, there have been about 25 high-level calls and meetings between senior officials, Israelis and Palestinians, and including just in the past hour between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. They agreed to maintain close consultation, and the consultation also includes regional allies. The U.S. has been in contact with the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Tunisians, and an envoy was sent to meet with the Jordanian officials as well as Israelis and Palestinians. The goal of the Biden administration is to help to de-escalate the violence, to restore calm and support Israel's right to self-defense. Because as Congresswoman Tlaib said, while Hamas may not speak for the Palestinian people, as we speak, Hamas is raining down rockets, over 1,000. Into Israel.
So let me ask you this.
This administration supports Israel's right to self-defense.
President Biden is talking in very calming tones about de-escalation, whilst you heard a Democratic Congresswoman talking about taking away the $4 billion that America currently gives to Israel. That's a bigger step than just de-escalation. Is that the way the administration should go now?
Absolutely not. Back in the Obama administration, when Biden was vice president, there was a 10-year agreement between the United States and Israel for $38 billion over the next decade. And that aid is essential. It is what is saving Israeli lives from the onslaught of terrorist attacks that are currently being launched, even as we speak, from Gaza. Every time there's an intercept by the missile defense system, the Iron Dome, that is supported by U.S. aid, and it's essential. It's saving lives.
But Hayley, I wonder if you start to recognise, though, that your party is going to the left of you on this issue, and that may become the dominant voice now in terms of relations with Israel.
I don't know that this should be about party and partisan politics. The last administration politicized this issue, and it really was quite damaging. President Biden is approaching this through the lens of U.S. national security interests and our alliances, including with Israel. And whenever there are civilian casualties, of course, it must come to an end. Israelis and Palestinians alike have the right to live in security and safety. And this administration is engaging to both restore calm, de-escalate the tension and the violence, and as well support Israel's right to self-defense.
How muscular do you want that engagement to be? Because the last time we really saw a US president make strides in the Middle East was, I guess you'd say, Bill Clinton. Now, do you want to see that kind of engagement? Do you want to see Joe Biden hosting the conferences, bringing the sides around the table and stepping in as the mediator? Or do you just want him to say de-escalate and leave it to Israel's neighbours?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're a long way from a resumption of negotiations similar to what we saw in the Clinton administration or even in the Obama administration. But what we've seen is a return of U.S. leadership on the world stage after 4 years of a reckless foreign policy with Donald Trump and a complete neglect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's pretty clear that you can't exactly turn your back on this conflict. It will reemerge. And this president is a leader internationally, and that is why he's engaging not just the Israelis, but also the Palestinians and our allies in the region to de-escalate. Yeah. It's an essential step, and it's going to continue.
Hayley Soifer, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.